what we saw in the Thatcher era was an era in which inequality went up, right? And she got a lot of stick for that because a lot of people became unemployed, a lot of state-owned industries in particular were shut down, lots of miners, basically never worked again. On the other hand, the growth rate that was achieved was so high that overall the whole country got better off. What we've got now is a situation in which you've got high levels of inequality, especially when it comes to housing and asset inequality, and you've got basically zero growth in real terms. So you've got an economy that's completely stagnant, but also one which is deeply unfair as well.
Gavin, hi. Morning.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So gangster movies,
Yeah.
Casino, Goodfellas, the Godfather trilogy. Which is the best?
That's very difficult. That's a very unfair opener.
I think it's fair for you.
I think objectively The Godfather is the best of all of those by a cat's whisker. My personal favourite is Goodfellas, though.
So controversially, I think Casino is better than Goodfellas.
That is pretty controversial.
Yeah,
Can you talk me through that?
I think it's better cast, it's better acted, it's a better story, and I think it was like peak De Niro.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved
I do really like one scene from Casino, I like it all, but the best scene in Casino is when the bosses make the decision right towards the end to eliminate all of the remaining witnesses. And there's like a montage of all of these people getting whacked, and it's playing the House of the Rising Sun in the background. And it's just super cool. But I still personally am going to have to go with Goodfellas, I think.
Oh, okay. Anyway, listen, there's a lot we can talk about there. The economic situation in our country is about as bleak as I've known it as an adult. And it may have been in my early childhood quite bleak for my parents, but now it feels particularly bleak. And interestingly, I'm going to throw Connor in here. We were having a chat on the way down. What was it you said to me, Connor?
I said, I don't get how me as a 21-year-old playing by all the rules is struggling so much compared to someone who's not playing by the rules. I feels like I'm not gaining much more by playing by the rules.
Well, give the background. What were you looking at?
Housing. It just seems pretty much impossible for me to look at moving into my own place anytime in the near future.
And I'll give some context. He was looking for houses, and he looked at the road where I bought my first house, and he said, yeah, house there is like 300,000 to 350,000. I was like, no, it isn't, Connor. Like my first house there 21 years ago was 100,000. We looked it up. It was.
Yeah.
300,000 to 350,000. So housing there is up 250%. We then had a look. I was like, let's look at what a nurse's salary's gone up in the same time period. Was it 27%?
Yes.
The
average wage was 40.
About 40%. CPI is up 80%. So it's like, hold on a second. So if you're a nurse, over a certain period of time, that 20 years, your wages have gone up 27%. CPI has gone up 80%. And this category of housing is up 250%.
Yeah.
And I was like, this isn't good.
Yeah. So I completely agree with you. Basically, there's very little to disagree with. I think what a lot of people are feeling at the moment, especially if you're on the wrong end of it, is that the social contract is basically broken. I don't know if you've seen those memes on the internet of Nick 30. I think it originally started in France, but basically it's this guy in the middle of the graphic with his head in his hands wearing a shirt because he can't make ends meet despite, as you say, doing all of the right things. And then there are all these outflow arrows to all of the places that his money's going. And it's Department of Work and Pensions, unemployed people, foreign aid budget, P&O cruises, Linda and Simon via pensions, and so on. I mean, the way that I talk about this is that basically there's two things that matter in an economy. And one is the growth rate, which broadly speaking determines how much living standards are rising or not across the board on average for everybody. And then the second thing is distribution. So how equal or unequal is your economy? What we saw in the Thatcher era was an era in which inequality went up, right? And she got a lot of stick for that because a lot of people became unemployed. A lot of state-owned industries in particular were shut down. Lots of miners, basically never worked again. On the other hand, the growth rate that was achieved was so high that overall the whole country got better off. What we've got now is a situation in which you've got high levels of inequality, especially when it comes to housing and asset inequality, and you've got basically zero growth in real terms. So you've got an economy that's completely stagnant, but also one which is deeply unfair as well.
Yeah, so I'm a fan of Thatcher.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of Thatcher because of her attitude towards our money. I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was something along the lines of the government doesn't have any money.
Yeah, it's your money.
Yeah, we only have your money, and we need to respect that, and I kind of like that. But when you put out that you're a fan of Thatcher, there are a lot of people who say, yeah, but Thatcher, she threw the miners under the bus and she drove inequality, blah, blah, blah. There's like these criticisms of it. But my understanding is our economy grew under her.
Yeah.
And the main issue comes when maybe perhaps you're a Labour voter and you want to protect the classes that's maybe been affected by her policies. But we don't seem to have had a government, I would say, since Thatcher, who's had a similar kind of attitude. Perhaps Liz Truss might have tried to be that person.
Ooh.
I think Liz recognizes the problems. There are debates about her execution, but I think she could have been a Thatcher-like character given long enough.
Yeah, I have a different view on Liz,
okay.
And I've been very critical of her in public, and perhaps we can talk about that. But just starting off with Thatcher, it's possible for two things to be true at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And she does have a kind of religious status for a lot of conservatives, and I'm from a conservative political background and family. Most of what she did at the time was spot on. For all the reasons that you've alluded to. She radically expanded home ownership, share ownership, real incomes went up over the course of her premiership. It is also true that a huge amount of structural unemployment was created, and probably in retrospect more should have been done to mitigate some of that rapid change. I also think there were some things that started kind of coming through the woodwork, which we're now living with the consequences of, one of which was the shift of our entire economy in terms of its kind of productive base towards financial services only. There was a huge amount of prosperity came from that, but I think probably that did result in a little bit of hollowing out in terms of other sectors and made our economy a bit skin deep. So I think she was brilliant in terms of her radicalism. What I would say, though, is that the issues were different. So we no longer have giant state-owned subsidized industries. We no longer have top rates of income tax of 96%. So the issue of stagnant growth is the same. That's something that does need to be tackled. But I think the causes of that this time are slightly different. I think one of the big mistakes that Liz and Kwasi Kwarteng made was thinking that the main problem was tax levels on their own, as opposed to all sorts of other things, whether that's housing, whether it's energy supply, whether it's planning, whether it's regulation.
So do you think Liz just moved too fast to try and solve one problem quickly without having kind of like a holistic view of the complete mess?
No, I think she was wrong. So okay. I don't think, I think it is the case that the top rate of income tax in this country is too high, particularly when it combines with things like loss of the personal allowance, losing your child benefit entitlements, losing childcare, and so on. But broadly speaking, she is not right that cutting taxes is the main lever that needs to be pulled, or even feasibly can be pulled in order to get the economy moving, when all of those other things I just mentioned are not in place. Crucially, her way of doing that was to borrow it, right? Like Liz was going to add over £40 billion of in-year borrowing for the purposes of cutting taxes. And as a conservative, one thing you do not do is borrow future people's money in order to cut taxes today. So was she right that the lack of growth really does underlie a lot of the problems we're facing today? Yes, but that's pretty much the only thing she was right about.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so when we talk about stagnant growth,
yeah,
are we also gaslighting ourselves in that we need to adjust for inflation,
Yep.
And when I was looking at GDP per capita,
Yep.
it said actually we've had an £11,000 drop, inflation adjusted, since 2008.
Okay.
It might not be exactly right, but something.
Yeah.
along those
So I
lines.
don't have the number in the top of my head. Normally, the figure that you see, there are different measures, right? But normally, the figure you see is that it's basically the same as it was in 2008, inflation adjusted. You also adjust for purchasing power parity and so on. But either way, it is going backwards at the moment. Once you factor in, so you also look at this thing called real net GDP per capita, which is that over time, stuff in the country deteriorates that belongs to all of us, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's the housing stock, whatever it is. Also, when you import hundreds of thousands of people into the country, the number of people, all the stuff in the country has to go around increases. So real net GDP per capita is actually going backwards. So yeah, living standards are actually worse than they were in 2008.
God. So sorry to do this. Paint a picture of how bleak it is.
Paint a picture of how bleak it is. Well, again, it depends on the calculations that you look at, but in today's money, the average household is probably between £8,000 and £10,000 worse off a year than they would have been if we kept up with pre-2008 growth levels, which is quite a lot. So, you're looking at being a third, roughly, quarter to a third worse off than you would otherwise have been.
And can you compare that to, say, the US?
Yeah, so real incomes in the US are 30 to 40% higher than they are here, even when you adjust for the fact that stuff in the US is more expensive. Americans are much richer than we are. And their houses are bigger as well.
Okay, so pretty bleak.
Not that they don't have other problems, right? Look what's going on in LA at the moment. And I think parts of the United States are clearly dysfunctional in other respects. But on pure income, they're doing much better than we are.
Yeah, I mean, LA is an ideological battleground.
Yeah.
Always has been. Well, it feels like it always has been.
But consider other countries, right? Like that are more reasonable comparators. So look at Germany, look at Switzerland, look at the Netherlands, look at Norway or Denmark. Any of these countries, these are exceeding us in GDP per capita and real incomes now. The French are about the same, but they work a lot less hard than we do. So they're getting the same money for working fewer hours because they're 20% more productive. And we can come on to that. But like they're getting more bang for their buck, as it were.
So how do we solve this problem of getting... Well, actually, let's actually go back to 2008 then. So obviously we had the global financial crisis. We bailed out the banks, bailed out the global financial system because I think there was fear of a global depression. I understood why. I understood how we got there. But what changed then? It almost feels like it was there was a time before them, time after, and since then the money printer's just gone fucking crazy.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that productivity growth, which is the main driver of what incomes and wages are, actually started to taper off in the UK just before the 2008 crisis, and that's quite interesting, and that's something that economists debate about. But then 2008 hits, boom, and it never recovers. Obviously, there's all sorts of reasons for that. The easy money, the supply of credit, all of this kind of stuff. The party is over. I think there's something else going on as well, especially in the UK. And I think that actually 2008 not only caused this absolute drop-off in growth, I actually think it revealed something that was going on beneath the surface as well.
Okay.
And that is, as I just mentioned, in relation to the Thatcher era, so much of our economy became weighted towards financial services only. And what we were actually seeing, and actually was fastest under New Labour, under Tony Blair, was the deindustrialisation of the country and the evaporation of productive industries, which used to bring well-paid jobs outside of the southeast. So the other sources of growth, the other sources of economic output, other than the city, had already gone into decline. Then the city blows up and you don't have that either. And you actually reveal what is quite a thin-based, quite hollowed-out economy that is too weighted towards one type of sector.
But then it's too weighted towards London as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Which causes pockets of economic deprivation across the country.
Yeah. So if you look at which regions in the country contribute, are net contributors in tax, so they pay into the Treasury as a region more than they take out, they're are two, which is London and the southeast, or possibly the east of England. It fluctuates. But all of the others are net subsidised to the tune of, the balance is about £60 billion a year or something like that. Yeah. So, when Boris Johnson talked about levelling up, there was a lot of confusion and people thought that it meant somehow stepping on London or trying to punish the southeast for being prosperous. It was actually the opposite. It was saying, well, if the rest of the country is not paying its own way in the world, then taxes are going to have to be higher on people in the southeast in order to keep the rest of the country afloat. And so I think what we've seen with the kind of the exponential shift towards financial services in the city only is a real growth in regional inequality that costs us a lot of money.
Deindustrialisation sounds like a strategy, but it really was it just carelessness?
That's a really good question. So very orthodox classical economists will tell you that the market always makes optimal decisions. So the reason you have deindustrialized is because it is no longer efficient for you to be making stuff. It's more efficient for things to be made in China, for example. I think this ignores a few things. I think it ignores the impact of monetary policy. But the biggest thing we've done in order to hobble our energy-intensive industries is basically driving ourselves into energy penury through choices that we've made. The other thing I would say is that China, since it joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, has made a concerted effort to dominate global manufacturing output and to drive the rest of the world out of business. And I think the UK has been almost a uniquely bad victim of that as well, alongside the US.
A victim, but we've kind of allowed it to happen?
Precisely, yeah. So I think it's something that was a strategy deliberately pursued by Beijing to generate these artificial trade surpluses. And we've essentially allowed it to happen, partly because of carelessness, but also partly because of kind of economic theory as well, that, oh, well, that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
But that's where, because we've seen, I think, a quite significant pushback on globalism.
Yeah.
My friend Thomas, we're with him in New York this week, and he turns up in a Kill All Globalist t-shirt, which made me laugh. But I think there's been this pushback in that I can understand why people want to push for global trade. I think trade is good. Yeah. But we have pushed global trade, which has benefited a certain class to the detriment of other classes within the country. I know Scunthorpe is famed for its steel production. We can't be competitive. Could we be competitive with better energy prices, or would Beijing still present a problem?
So I think both things are true. I think China will continue to do what it does to subsidize its industries, to manipulate its currency, to keep its exports cheap, to force down wages and living standards in order to lower its cost base. At the same time, we are choosing to hobble ourselves with a total lack of energy. If you look at industries like the chemical sector, for example, it doesn't sound very attractive, doesn't sound very sexy or modern. It's actually really, really productive, really important part of the UK economy outside of the southeast. Unfortunately, it's an absolute freefall. So alongside other energy-intensive industries, the chemical sector, its output has been down by a third in 3 years.
In our country? Or?
In our country.
And that is because of energy prices?
That's largely because of industrial energy prices, which are the highest in the G20. I know.
Oh, God. Okay.
And we're actually pursuing this a bit further and deeper as a matter of policy, right? So Keir Starmer said that he wants to hitch us up to the EU's carbon pricing mechanism, which will just kind of lock us into the same insanity where we choose to make the cost of energy higher for industries. If you look at the net zero thing more broadly, I mean, this really is kind of smoke and mirrors. So successive prime ministers have gone around saying that we have reduced our carbon emissions further and faster than any other country in the world. But that's only true if you look at the emissions that are just produced onshore. If you actually look at our consumed emissions, so that includes the emissions that were produced in stuff that we import here, and then they're shipped around the world as well in lovely big tankers, our contribution to global emissions has actually been going up, whilst we've been patting ourselves on the back and saying, well, we've hit this target because, we've reduced our emissions onshore. What you're doing is you've just moved the production from A to B, given yourself a little sticker, and you've hollowed out your own industries. It's a complete farce. Meanwhile, your contribution to global emissions is actually rising. Like, the planet doesn't understand where national borders are or care about your national target. It really is madness.
Okay, hold on. So we've hobbled our economy with higher energy prices.
Yeah.
To say we've reduced our carbon emissions.
Yeah.
But we've used a selective measure of within our borders when we've actually been a net contributor to global emissions.
Yeah, and our contribution to global emissions is rising.
Oh my God. Do you...
You wouldn't believe this could be true, right? But this is the sort of the Dominic Cummings, like, the system is working as intended. Politicians can go on TV and say, because they know that voters do rightly care about global warming and the planet and whatnot, and they can come out and say, well, we've made further and faster progress towards this target and saving the whales and everything than anyone else has. But the long-term effect of that is the structural undermining of the energy-intensive bit of our economy, which, as it turns out, is really important.
But Gavin, it's a lie.
Yes.
Do you... They know this, right?
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
Well, so that's the interesting thing. I mean, I spend a lot of my time in Westminster having these kinds of conversations, and there's a kind of groupthink that tends to prevail. So I think this is now increasingly widely known amongst think tankers, advisors, MPs, etc. I don't think it was widely known or understood even 2 years ago. Alternatively, it might be that people come up with these justifications, like they'll say, oh, it's important that we show global leadership. The rest of the world will catch up afterwards.
I don't think anyone cares about us anymore.
No. Well, if you look at China, China has been increasing its production of energy, both in renewables and in fossil fuels, absolutely massively, to fuel the growth of its huge, now globally dominant manufacturing base. And also the hilarious thing is that it's managed to get control of all of the production of the renewables infrastructure as well, which we then buy from them.
And ship over on tankers.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the global stage for me right now is America, Russia, China.
Yeah.
With some growing Indian influence. And we seem like the old cool kid in school who 20 years later is still like, hey, I'm still cool. I'm still important. We're not. I mean, we're laughed at.
Yeah. But I think the sad thing is that a lot of our problems are self-inflicted.
Yeah.
So, I mean, first of all, to come back to the fairness point, the housing issue is self-inflicted. That is because we don't build enough houses. I think we've hit the annual house building target once in the last 20 years, if that. I think the Centre for Cities has calculated that even if we were hitting the target regularly, which we're not, given the growth in demand, it would take 50 years to close the housing shortage. That's through our planning laws and planning policy, and also the fact that we're choosing to increase the population through net migration at a rate that's faster than we're building houses. That is self-inflicted. That's also got an economic impact because people then can't afford to live in the places where growing industries are. They can't afford to live in Cambridge. They can't afford to live in London. They can't afford to live in these places.
Like my son said, he wants to buy a house in Bedford where we live.
Yeah.
And he's struggling to afford that. And he has a well-paid job here.
Yeah.
And he's struggling. I mean, you basically can't buy a house for under 250,000.
Yeah.
What was available, Connor? Was it like 3 or 4?
There was, not many at all.
And what were they, just
and
tiny little flats?
Yeah, it's tiny 1-bedroom flats or
Bear in mind, my first house 21 years ago was £100,000, 3-bedroom and a terrace.
Yeah.
I think there's another thing on the housing which is often overlooked. Well, it's not often overlooked, but it is overlooked sometimes. I think we should mention it here, is that you can't save money in the bank anymore. You know, if you save money in the bank, it's a melting ice cube.
Yeah.
You are losing, I mean, arguably, I don't believe the inflation number, by the way. Even when they tell us inflation is 3%, I still think it's double that.
Well, it's higher in the housing sector, right?
Yeah, but because you can't save money in the bank, if you left £100,000 in the bank for 10 years, that's not going to buy you £100,000 of stuff anymore.
Yep.
And if you want to save for your future, one of the things people do is they buy a second house.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's going to go up 250% over 20 years, I mean, that's can be part of your pension.
Yeah.
And I think there is another thing that's become part of this, which I've seen a bit more prominently. I don't know, do you see the protests over the weekend in Barcelona and Lisbon? Which is the Airbnb market, has created a landlord's market, which is forcing people out of cities as well. So there is the landlord market, there's the investor market, there's the destruction of the money, there is not building enough houses, there's net migration. All of them, I mean, on a scarce asset, which property is and land is driving up the price.
That's right, yeah. I mean, the stat that every politician needs to know is that houses now cost, on average, they now cost 8 to 10 times the average salary, whereas in the 1970s it was 3 times. Now people say, oh yes, but I was paying 15% interest on my mortgage back in the 1970s, whereas interest rates are much lower now. Yeah, you're paying that percentage on a much lower price relative to your income, and what people are getting for what they're paying each month is much lower, much less, because either they're renting rather than buying, or they're just getting a smaller property. So houses are just literally more expensive.
Well, and the traditional thing, I remember when I bought my house, the amount you could borrow was about 4 times your salary.
That's right.
And so if you want to buy a £450,000 house in Bedford, which is let's say a 4-bedroom detached in an okay area, you need to be on £100,000 a year, really, or you need 2 incomes together on £100,000. But you say that, but the cost of living itself has gone up. So you kind of need to be on more. I mean, you've got higher taxes, higher council tax. I think every part of our economy has been smacked into the wrong direction. Yeah, and it is bleak. So you mentioned earlier talking about getting the economy going.
Yeah.
I sometimes question if it's savable. I feel like it's been really bad under the last 14 years of Conservative, and I feel like Labour are accelerating the issues. Yeah, give me your diagnosis of Rachel Reeves first. But what are we, about 8 months in, 10 months in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty dire, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the way I put this is that our economy needs major surgery, and what she's doing instead is she's tinkering at the edges. So she's behaving kind of like an accountant who's got to just about keep the company books in order before the next audit.
I think you're being nice there.
Yeah, well, maybe that's overly generous, but the only thing she seems concerned about is making sure that she has a certain degree of headroom to the 5-year fiscal target. So, and that's literally it, right?
I feel like she's doing heart surgery and cutting your leg off.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're an employer, then absolutely. I think Labour's manifesto commitment was that they wouldn't increase taxes on working people. Clearly, people who employ other people are not working people.
Yeah, I know.
in their eyes, but of course, those taxes end up getting passed on in the form of lower wages. Because if you're an employer who is now footing a bigger national insurance bill, you're going to be able to pay your employee. Did
you ever hear what Reagan said about this?
Which one?
I wonder if you can find that, Connor. We had it on here before, where he was being interviewed on like a chat show, and they asked him about taxes on companies. He said, you can try to remember it, but something along the lines of the interviewer was like, you can just increase the taxes on corporations. They're making lots of money. And he said, every single tax on a corporation is a tax on the working people.
Yeah.
Every single one. He said, where do you think they pass those tax increases on to?
Yeah.
Don't just swallow them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm an employer. We had to raise our prices, which means less customers. We have to think about recruitment. Is this the one?
tax burden to business and industry. But business doesn't pay taxes. Oh, don't get the wrong idea. Business is being taxed so much so that we're being priced out of the world market. But business must pass its costs of operations, and that includes taxes, on to the customer in the price of the product. Only people pay taxes, all the taxes. Government just uses business in a kind of sneaky way to help collect the taxes. They're hidden in the price. We aren't aware of how much tax we actually pay.
I mean, he's just fundamentally right.
Yeah. Look, one of the biggest drivers of weak UK growth is the fact that our investment rate as a country is really poor. And it actually has been for many decades. It seems to be a real problem that the UK has. Rachel Reeves talks about investment and fixing the foundations, but it's all just state spending, essentially. She's talking about investment purely in state terms, whether that's spending more money on the NHS, spending more money on schools, or even doing some of the capital investment in infrastructure and so on that we probably do actually need. But that's the only way in which she thinks about investment. Of course, most of the investment in the economy is actually from the private sector, and it's not as high as it could be or needs to be.
Well, if you're an investor and you have the opportunity to invest in any global market, surely you look for growth markets.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the good things that the last government did, the last Conservative government did, which is not widely known about because it's quite technical, is the full expensing policy, right? You can write off all of your capital expenses against your corporation tax bill in the first year, and that's a direct incentive to spend on investments that will bring a return. We're just a low investment economy, right? We consume a lot, but we invest very little compared to development-based economies, whether that's China, whether that's South Korea, whether it's Taiwan, whether it's historically Japan, although Japan's in some difficulties now. We just need to invest more. And if you look at where our pools of capital are in this country, they're not deployed in places that are productive. They're not deployed in UK companies. They're deployed in bonds, they're deployed in gilts, they're deployed in real estate, things that are basically sort of dead, things that are not, they actually need to be in companies that are making things and doing things. We've got all this cash sitting around. To come back to your point about what's the potential, and it's just not doing anything. And a big reason for that is that Gordon Brown slapped the pension funds with these incredibly risk-averse regulations that meant that our savings are not invested in sensible places. Asian economies have not done this. They put people's savings into things that are going to get a return.
Okay. God, this is mad. And just for people listening, so they understand, when Rachel, because there are people who vote for Labour, have voted for Labour, may for some, God for no reason, vote for them again in the next election. We'll see Rachel Reeves' spending review. They will see all her commitments to all these large-scale investments into the UK economy and see, that this is job creation. But help people understand, and me, people understand why the government reinvesting tax revenues into the economy is not it's not going to drive the kind of productivity we want.
Okay, well, it depends what the money is being spent on. So government spending is divided into what we call revenue expenditure, which is day-to-day stuff, paying your bills as a government, and capital expenditure, which is investment in infrastructure, roads, railways, hospitals, things that require long-term investment. The latter is actually good for the economy, and arguably the Conservatives during austerity stripped too much out of the long-term investment budget. They needed to find savings somewhere. I totally get the argument. In retrospect, we probably didn't invest enough in those days. Current revenue spending, putting up salaries for trade unions or for public sector workers, that sort of thing, okay, it might stimulate consumption a little bit, but ultimately that's just taking money from this person, Mr. Taxpayer, and giving it to a public sector employee. That's not investment. That's not going to bring a return.
Is there leakage in that as well?
What do you mean by leakage?
In that, if I take £100 from me and I give it to somebody else, a public worker, they're going to spend it, but by the time it gets to them, is it a lot less than £100?
Well, obviously, they don't literally take £100 off, off a banker and give that £100 to a teacher. It goes into a pot, and then they make these various decisions. I think where there's a different source of leakage is that we really punish the kind of the most talented, the most innovative, and the most productive people in our economy with incredibly high marginal rates of tax, so that we can spend money on other things, whether it's a teacher's salary, whether it's the NHS, or whether it's something else. That has got a very damaging effect on incentives. I mean, we've actually got, I forget exactly where it is, but there's one point of the income curve where you actually start losing money if you were to get a promotion. You actually start getting things between 100 and 150 once you factor in losing the personal allowance, loss of childcare allowance, and so on. So we really punish the most kind of potentially economically productive people.
Right. Okay.
So that there's an economic leakage in that sense.
Right. Okay. But the main issue you're saying is we're taking, because, okay, I'll go back a step. We should be paying certain public sector workers more. Me and Kurt, we made a film in Harlow and Bedford looking at inflation, and we went to a food bank, and there was a nurse there. We spoke to the nurse, and poor girl was very embarrassed about being there, but she explained, my salary does not go far enough for me to be able to pay my bills, pay my rent, and feed myself and my children. She had no choice. And as we said, we looked, it's up 27% in 21 years, when CPI is up 80% and housing's up. So like, there's certain people we should be paying more and haven't been able to keep up with inflation. But at the same time, I think what you're saying is the issue is we are not directing enough into growth, directing enough money into investment, into growth. And that's...
Yeah. Whether that's in the private sector or the public sector. I mean, what I would like to see is a world in which growth levels are high enough that tax receipts go up, and then the government has got more money to pay public sector employees, doctors, nurses, teachers properly. But we're not in that world. We're in a world where we've got low growth. That damages receipts. I mean, it was just in the news today that it looks as though Rachel Reeves is actually going to have a shortfall of £20 billion over the forecast period, according to the OBR. So
20 billion black hole.
Yeah. Well, yes, indeed. Yeah, exactly. They might start wheeling out that line a little bit less often than they were before.
Well, that 22 billion black hole has been disproved now, hasn't it? Largely.
Yeah, my understanding is that's true. Yeah,
but
it's a bit of a fake number.
But they keep repeating it, even though I think the OBR have said it's untrue.
That's right, yeah.
Which is, again, lying.
Yes, yeah.
To the public.
Well, also, a big part of the so-called black hole was choices they made, right? So Rachel Reeves increased spending by over £70 billion, which was, I think, 8 times more than she said she was going to. And part of that was pay rises for public sector, trade unions, and so on. But I mean, the things that determine whether you've got this money to spend is the growth rate, which determines the tax receipts, and then your other spending liabilities. And we're a country that's got low growth and very high spending liabilities. And those spending liabilities are only due to rise because of our demographics, because of our aging society. That is only going to cost us more over the years coming in health spending and in pensions liabilities.
Hold on, Connor. This chart he's showing, it's got the components of UK government spending 2022-23.
Yeah.
Are we saying the largest
pot's other?
It's called other. Yeah,
if you did health and pension liabilities, that is just over a quarter. Social
security pensioners is yellow, health is green. I don't know what other is. It sort of depends how you cut the cake. But yeah, those are the biggest drivers. And then of course you've got debt servicing as well.
Yeah, and that's only interest as well. That's the one that always freaks me out. And that's 2022-23. Because it's behind education on there. That's 8.4. There's 9.1% on education. I would hazard a guess net debt interest is ahead of education.
Yeah, so this is 2022 to 23 figures. Yeah. I think debt interest is now third.
Wow.
Now, obviously, that's a real problem because that is exposed to fluctuations in interest rates. Because if you have to refinance your debt, I think I was looking up this morning, a 1% increase in interest rates on government debt means an increase of 10 to 12 billion pounds of annual spending.
Okay. And our interest rates are higher.
Yeah. And you have to find that from somewhere, right? And the thing is, this is only going to increase because, unfortunately, well, in one way, an aging society is a good thing, right? Because people are living longer and they're living more healthily for longer. And we can cure diseases and prolong life in ways that we didn't used to be able to. But that comes with a very big cost. And unfortunately, there's not enough working people paying tax into the pot relative to the number of retired people.
And we're scaring off the good people.
And we're scaring off the very high earners, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
This is 24-25, so
24.
debt interest is 104.9 billion now, whereas education is 88.8.
I mean, and that's a change over what, that's 22, that's over 2 years. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's 15% ahead, is that about? 15 to 20% ahead?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
But
more than on defence, more than on education, more than on welfare.
It's funny because, I was always trying to understand why the government spends so much.
Yeah.
Like, why is they spending so much? Surely they know there's a problem here. I also think we've become a grifting culture. And so what I mean by that is I think people understand very quickly how to play the system. And I'll give you a great example. We did a Freedom of Information Act request on our local council in Bedford, just having a look into what's happening with provision of social housing. And it came back that 900 people, I can't remember if it's just social housing or emergency social housing. But anyway, the cost in 2022-23, have you got the numbers, Connor? Yeah, because I sent them to Connor. And by the way, I'm not saying this. I'll explain what I think the grift is, because I don't think it's people being in unfortunate positions.
So 900 people in Bedford, the costs for the accommodation, gross expenditure 22-23, 7.59 million. 23-24, 12.86. 24-25, 17.99.
So basically it's gone from 7.5 million to 18 million in 2 years.
Yeah.
And I think
for 900 people, I think it was 22 grand per person. It was
£22,000 per person. Now, a lot of these people, I know where they're being housed. It's either there's 30 that are being housed in hotel rooms, so that's not the major part. But we have a number of these HMOs where somebody's taken over like an old office block or a property above shops, and they convert them into these HMOs. And there's a friend of mine I know who did it, and he was explaining how much money you can make from this. But essentially, because it's the local council, it's always like it's an emergency, I need one. They're always paying way above market rates. And so £22,000 a year is nearing £2,000 a month. Now, if you want to rent a house in Bedford, say I was a renter or Connor was renting, you can get a nice, I mean, you probably check it on Rightmove, Connor, but as I remember looking last time, you get a nice 3-bedroom terrace in a nice area for about £1,400. Yet we're spending nearly £2,000 a month to put people in not as nice places. Now, I could be wrong here. It could turn out when you do the investigation, there's some people, a family of 5, put in a bigger home. But my gut instinct is that, and from speaking to people I know, is that government checks are easy to get and they always pay over the odds. And I think it's the same. It's almost like with the NHS, with nurses get fed up, low wages, they quit, they go and work for agencies, they get employed back for 3 times the rate, and then you pay the recruitment fee on top. I just think there's a lot of private sector stuff that's learned how to grift the government systems to make money from it. I think that's a huge problem we have. And not even just that. I mean, the mobility scheme to me is a huge grift. And I just think the government is now, it's almost like chasing its tail.
Yeah.
It's got desperate.
Yeah.
And with everything it has to pay for, it's like, shit, we need to pay for that. Shit, we need to pay for this.
Yeah.
And they're just paying for it. But it's not a very well planned economy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right.
There you go. £1,500. I mean, that's a nice area. Great denim.
3 bed, 3 bath.
3 bed, 3 bath. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's a lot of truth to that. I think there's a degree of, our taxes, our regulations and our bureaucracy are famously complicated. And where there are complications, people are going to try and game the system, whether it's shifting their income from PAYE into a company or whatever it may be, or trying to get around VAT thresholds or whatever it is. My own view, for what it's worth, is the kind of Elon Musk Doge style of thinking that it's all just government waste. It's all government waste. It's all just civil service pay. It's true to an extent, but it's not the main driver of the levels of state spending, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I'll give you a concrete example. If you took the spending plans of today, so you keep budgets exactly the same, obviously adjust for inflation, but what we actually spend money on is the same. But you wound back to the demographics that we had 20 years ago in terms of the balance between working population, kids, and retired. You would have a savings so big that you could reduce income tax by 13p in the pound. And that's some calculations that my friend, the MP, Neil O'Brien, did a few weeks ago. So what is actually happening is, okay, yes, there are some areas where we're choosing to spend more and where we could make reductions, but a lot of it is just the number of people who are now retired, and we can talk about the cost of the pensions triple lock, and rising pressures on the NHS, and the fact that we've got a diminished workforce trying to pay for all of this. So if you're not talking about our demographic trends, which are, if I haven't been negative enough, are also disastrous, in terms of the tax burden, demographics is kind of the only show in town. Not many people seem aware of this.
Okay, so if you were attacking this problem, Is
this the thing about one person's now paying for two people's worth of stuff?
Yeah, I don't know that exact number, but yeah.
Well, I mean, look, we had, what was it in Birmingham and Manchester? 25% of people are not working.
Yeah.
Of working age.
Yeah. So we've definitely got a big problem with what economists call economic inactivity, but is basically hidden unemployment. So we've got between 5 and 6 million people on out of work benefits. Only a small minority of that is traditional unemployment, what was job seekers allowance. You would expect to have a certain amount of unemployment month to month. And that's not just like a stock of people, right? That's a flow. People lose their job, they get a job, they lose their job. The bulk of that is either basically kind of single mums, who we support in the first few years of the kid's life without them having to work. They do have to go to work pretty quickly under universal credit, or it's people on sickness benefit. And the change that we've had since the pandemic is we've had an explosion in people claiming out of work benefits for sickness benefit, particularly for reasons of supposed mental health conditions.
Yeah, so it's another grift.
Arguably, yes. And that is adding a huge amount to the welfare bill, probably some £12 billion a year.
Okay, but 12 billion isn't going to save our economy.
No.
But it's also people who are not contributing to the economy.
Correct.
As well.
Yeah. And of course, the more people who are not in work, the more companies say we can't get labour, and the more the lobbying goes up for ever more immigration, even though we've had the highest levels this country has ever experienced since 2021.
How do you even solve that problem, though? I mean, like Zia was talking about that on Question Time the other day. He's like, this is one of the first things reform would attack.
Immigration or welfare?
Well, welfare.
I think you need to do two things at the same time. So I think you need to cut off the supply of cheap labour from overseas in order to stop distortions in the true price of labour in the economy. So wages can be a reflection of the population that we have, not an infinity flow of workers from overseas.
Why does that distort it? Because they're willing to accept lower wages?
Yeah. Well, and it also reduces the incentive for the government to do something about the people who are not working.
Well,
here, right?
So that's an interesting thing. So I'll give an example. And I don't know if this is me just being too simplistic in it, but whenever I order food from Deliveroo, and they can't find the house, and they phone me, they often can't. There's a communication problem.
Yeah,
there's a language communication problem, and I don't know, but my suspicion is that perhaps these are people who've come to the country recently.
Yeah,
they're happy to get on a bike around town, and deliver Nando's and Pizza Express to people. And there's plenty of those jobs that exist. and we have plenty of people unemployed. And I remember when we left the EU, there was this question. It's like, well, who's going to do the fruit picking? And people wouldn't. I was like, what about the unemployed people in this country? And Connor rightly said in the car on the way, he said, look, Dad, I know you. You know, if you lost your job and you needed to earn money, you'd go out and wash cars if you had to. You'd just do anything.
Yeah.
You'd go and work. He said, have we got a point where there's a privileged class in our country where there's a certain level of job they're not willing to do? They'd rather just be unemployed.
I think there's some truth in that. But I think it is also true that if you are competing with a lower skilled economic migrant from overseas, from a much poorer country who's willing to work for very little, then objectively that is quite unfair. So
there is a minimum wage as well.
Well, there is, but maybe that particular job should be paying more than the minimum wage.
Right, okay.
And maybe we've got a kind of a subsidized labor problem, which is actually not good for efficiency or productivity either. Because if companies have this never-ending supply of cheap workers, they've got no incentive to invest in automation, in technology, or upskilling the workforce that they have got. There's also no incentive, or there's less incentive for the government to actually get tough on the people on welfare who could be working and should be working.
So this is like when you hear about, I don't know, in America, the large hotel chains lobby for higher immigration because they want cheaper, lower paid migrants to clean hotel rooms.
And we've had that in this country as well, with some of the big hospitality and retail chains saying, oh, well, our business model doesn't work without endless supplies of people from poor countries coming over here every year. And I think, well, maybe you should make your business more efficient then. Will someone please think of the, I don't know, the Wagamamas or whatever it is.
So free markets are efficient? Freer, more efficient, more...
So you could argue that having an open border is free market, right? But the reality is that we all live in countries, and living standards and costs differ wildly between the UK, Sweden, India, Pakistan, and South America. And you could say, oh, well, maybe a British worker who's facing their job being undercut by a cheap worker from overseas, maybe he should do what the migrant is doing. Maybe he or she should just go off to some other country where they can sell their labour for its global market value. But is that the kind of society we want to live in? And that's why we get this kickback against globalization and mass migration.
Well, look, even my most hardcore libertarian friends, some of them still debate the issue of borders and say, well, because obviously some libertarians say we should have open borders, but some of them are like, no, that's the one, that's my red line. It doesn't work. We shouldn't have open borders. Okay, but free markets without open borders, we would have proper price discovery for these jobs.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it wouldn't cost £10 to get your car washed. It would cost £20 because that would be the set market rate to pay people the hourly rate to stand out there and wash your cars. Actually, that's also an interesting point. Do you remember you used to go and get your car washed in a car wash machine?
Yes.
You would drive through.
Yes.
But now you pay a group of usually Eastern European people to wash your car instead.
There is de-automation happening in the car wash sector. The proportion of car washes that are automated is going backwards. This is not how economies are meant to work, right? And that is an example of mass low-skilled migration undermining productivity and undermining economic progress.
So how the fuck do you do this around, Gavin? Because there seems to be so many issues. Like, again, I was discussing with Connor on the way, and Connor was rightly saying, can this be fixed? I was like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, so again, coming back to the point you were asking me earlier, we're in a bad spot, but we've got some really good fundamentals. So the UK has one of the most educated workforces in the world. We've got some world-leading universities. We've got some really crap ones as well that we should probably get rid of. But we've got some really world-leading ones that are the envy of the world. We've got the Golden Triangle, Oxford, Cambridge, and London. Many countries would kill to have that kind of potential cluster of value. We've got a very strong knowledge economy. I know I said we're over-indexed on financial services, but our financial services and professional services sectors are strong. We're really good at stuff like pharmaceuticals, life sciences. In terms of innovation, we're way ahead of the curve on quantum. We've got the potential in AI, but it's about commercializing all of it. A lot of these things are self-inflicted. Our planning rules mean that it's impossible to get lab space. or to get approval for a new factory or a new plant. Restrictions on house building mean that you don't get that kind of, what economists call agglomeration effects around economic hubs. We choose to inflict ridiculous energy prices on ourselves. And we also choose to basically import lots of very unproductive labour, which ultimately ends up costing us more money in the long run. But because those people will eventually be able to claim benefits and then eventually retire, we could just stop that. Right? We could just end that.
What, step by step? So,
well, I think you could do. So the migration thing you could do tomorrow. You don't even have to do primary legislation. The Home Secretary can just change the rules.
And the rules should be like an Australia famed system of points-based, high quality, allowing the people we want to come in who can be a net contributor, smartest.
Very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
Well, the irony is that what Boris Johnson promised was an Australian-style points-based system. And we do have, in some ways, an Australian-style points-based system. It's just that the Australian system is really tight, and ours is famously liberal. And I think what happened was there were genuine labour shortages because of the pandemic. All the borders were closed. By definition, people couldn't move. But then afterwards, there was a huge demand for workers. There was a huge amount of lobbying of government, and they set incredibly low thresholds. So I think the salary threshold for a skilled worker was only $26,000 a year at first. That is below the level you need to earn in order to be a net contributor fiscally.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So genuinely importing fiscally net negative people is what the country was doing.
And that was the lobbying from the corporations.
I think there was a bit of pressure from business. There was a genuine desire to get the economy back on the road after the pandemic. I think, in general, I think things in Westminster are more cock-up than conspiracy. I know some people think that the immigration rules were a sort of deliberate plot. I kind of think it was somewhere in between, right? So some people thought that after Brexit, what people really wanted was radical immigration reductions. I think that was probably true. Some people, I think, for their own purposes, because they were libertarians or whatever, sort of twisted that and said, oh, no, we don't want lower numbers. We just want control. The numbers can be higher so long as there's control. My own view is that I don't think that's an honest representation of what people were voting for. So there was not internal agreement within the Conservative government on what the philosophy should be around the new immigration rules. And then, I don't know what was going on in Priti Patel's head, but they just set these criteria that were incredibly liberal. And I still can't understand it to this day.
Well, what I can't understand is the level of incompetence we have in successive governments of people who seem to not understand how the economy works. Like I get smart people all the time on here, like yourself. We've had what, I don't know, 5, 6 economists in the last couple of months, and they all talk about similar things. Some differences of opinion. Some people are more free market, but they're all able to identify the problems. They all speak confidently that these are things easily to fix, get our energy prices lower, reduce migration, do things to drive investment. Yet we have governments incapable of taking this advice and implement it. So I question, can they not do it? Are they worried? Is it a problem that the economic cycle doesn't align with the political cycle and they don't want to make these decisions because keeping their seats more important than doing the right thing for the country, which is essentially against their fucking mandate as a politician, which is do the best for the country? I just cannot understand how we're governed by such a group of either economically illiterate people or power-hungry evil narcissists. Like, it just doesn't make it. Because if I was Gavin, if I was to become a politician, I would like to think my mandate is the best thing for the country, And if I was talking to somebody like you and say I was in government, I would have to stand up and loudly say, what we're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
Like if I was a Labour politician, I would have to stand up and loudly say, Rachel Reeves is making mistakes. Our party is destroying our country.
Yeah.
I'd have to do the same if I was on the Conservative Party. If Kemi's policies I didn't think went far enough, I'd have to do that. And I don't understand why almost nobody does. I just don't understand it.
Well, I mean, several years ago, my friend Nick Timothy and I started this project, Onward, the think tank I work for, called the Future of Conservatism Project. And we thought our target audience, Conservative MPs, policymakers, advisors, they still don't get it. They still don't know what needs to change. We're going to write 3 big reports summarizing all the problems and laying them out and say, this is what you need to do. Done. Just do that.
Country fixed.
Exactly. And the fairest challenge that I got to that project when I was explaining it to people was, that's really great, but is the problem actually a lack of intellectual understanding? Is it actually that we don't know what the problems are? Or is the problem actually low quality personnel? Like, people are not, MPs are not smart enough or whatever it is, or their incentives are wrong. Or is it that there are just political barriers to doing all of this? So the biggest one is obviously the house building issue that we were talking about before. When he was the housing secretary, Robert Jenrick tried to do a quite radical planning reform to make it much easier to build residential housing, and then it was all junked because a by-election went the wrong way. And
sorry, explain that. So what happened? So he had the plan.
Yep. There was I've forgotten the name of the constituency now. It was a very famous thing that happened. Basically, there was a by-election where there was a local backlash against. It was basically a NIMBY backlash against development. The by-election was lost. The party freaked out and said, "Okay, we're not doing any of this because house building is unpopular with our base." I think most of the people who are now high up in the Conservative Party recognise that was a long-term error, but it was fundamentally what the political incentives at the time pushed them towards. When you look at really long-term things, Rachel Reeves' proposed planning reform is pretty much the only thing that she's proposed that might do any good. You won't get returns on that for over 10 years. If you're a politician, Rachel Reeves isn't going to be the Chancellor in 10 years' time. Why would you care about that longer horizon when, you're not going to be around anymore? So
because you want to do what's right for the country, and that's what you should do as a politician.
I agree.
There's a complete lack of intellect and integrity across Westminster, I feel.
I think there is. There's also a lack of a willingness to really take an argument to the people.
Yeah.
So if you look back at austerity, objectively unpopular.
Yeah.
You're cutting things. You're cutting people's entitlements and lives getting worse. At the high point of that, austerity was actually polling quite well. It was actually quite popular. And when you saw journalists going around doing vox pops in the street with microphones, people were saying, and it was in quite crude terms, but they were saying, we've been living beyond our means. We're going to have to spend less as a country. People kind of got it, that the budgets had to come down. I almost think if you went to people and said, well, look, I know you've already got your house, and most people in the UK are already outright homeowners because our population is so old. And you said, we know you've got your house already and you don't stand to benefit from this. But what about your children? And what about your grandchildren? Don't you want them to have the possibility of becoming a homeowner? I think if you made that moral argument, you might actually get somewhere. I mean, when you ask people in general, should more houses be built? They say yes, pretty consistently by about sort of a 20-point margin. But of course, when you say, what if it's near you? Then all of a sudden they say, oh, no. I think somewhere else would be a better place to build houses. But they also say, quite reasonably, I don't want loads of development near me of rubbish, poor quality housing just to house more waves of migration. And that's reasonable.
Yeah, and do you know what I will throw into that? I can be very critical of the politicians. I think most of them are economically illiterate. But I also think we have an economically illiterate electorate in that I think people understand the basics. When Jeremy Corbyn was, his final election was promising lots of free stuff. I think most people said, well, how can we pay for that? And they understood the basics of that. But I don't actually think a lot of people really understand how the basics of the economy work. So much that I actually think that Labour voters or socialists don't actually realize is the things they want actually damage the people they think they're going to help. They actually drive inequality, but also, as you touched on earlier with Thatcher, they don't have the growth that goes with it.
Yeah. I think not everyone fully appreciates that stuff, value, has to be created.
Yeah.
They think just there's this stuff in the world, and that guy's got more than me, so therefore and that's not fair. And I live in a crap area, and he doesn't, so I'm going to have some of that, please.
Yeah. Fuck
you
him.
know, yeah, exactly. The sort of zero-sum fallacy. And of course, that's not the way that it works. Stuff has to be produced. Stuff has to be made by people who take on risk.
Yeah.
Right? It's like if you've got money, it's not just because maybe you've just inherited a load of money, but often it's because you've borrowed money and you've speculated and you've got a return. But also, like, many times that won't be the case, and you'll have made a loss. So these things are based on risk taking. I think the problem.
And by the way, throw into that, we've taken away the benefits of the risk, right?
Yeah.
If you start a business these days, it's really fucking hard. But also, every single benefit, the dividends benefit, gone. Entrepreneurs relief has been attacked. It's just very hard now as a business owner or an investor to and it kind of adds to that argument that you said, that people are parking money in kind of unproductive assets, whereby why invest it? Why invest cash into a business when you can leave it in, I don't know, I leave all mine in Bitcoin now, but you can leave it in certain pots where you can just be in guaranteed interest.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another thing that's can be difficult to explain, and part of my job is trying to do this, is explaining to people what growth is, because it's a pretty abstract word.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what is growth? Growth is basically just means more stuff to go around that has to be produced. And people just don't really think in those terms. And that's kind of understandable. I think what happened in the Thatcher era is that became very tangible. People actually felt the proceeds of growth because they could buy a house when before they were living in a council house. They could buy a car when previously they couldn't afford to, or they could buy 2 cars when previously they could only have 1. Now, of course, she was in for long enough for people to actually feel on the ground the practical benefit of the economy doing better. But on the other hand, I would just put out this sort of challenge. There hasn't been any growth on a per person basis since 2008. So when people say, "Oh well, I'm poor because he's rich, zero sum," are they not partly right at the moment?
Well, look, I mean, in a high inflation economy, those who own the assets benefit the most. Like, I benefit from high inflation. I own a property. I own Bitcoin. I have this kind of it's kind of this paradox, really, because I have these assets that increase in value, that benefit me during a time of inflation, but I have these businesses which are pricing out my customers because of inflation.
Yeah.
And so it's this weird kind of paradox. But ultimately, I don't want to get rich off a failing economy.
Yeah.
That's depressing.
Yeah.
And also makes me want to leave the country I love.
Yeah.
And so, ultimately, it leads to you might have more money, but you're generally going to feel less safe.
Yeah.
I don't think it's so. Yes, I think it's because we don't have real capitalism.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. And there's a difference between wealth that is made through just speculation on assets and wealth that comes from investment and creating things. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the wealth that's been built up in recent years in the UK has been from speculation on assets inflating, particularly the housing sector.
Yeah.
Right. But who does that help? Right. That just makes the person who owns the houses richer. You're not creating a company. You're not creating a product.
You're not creating jobs.
You're not creating jobs.
Yeah. So what would you do about the NHS? Because obviously it's this sacred thing that you can't touch and criticize. But at the same time, I mean, I bumped into a guy. I talk about on the podcast, there's this private doctors on our high street in Bedford called the Medic Clinic.
Yeah.
And we ended up using it because I tried to get a doctor's appointment. It took 3 weeks. I was like, I'll be better by then. And somebody said to me, there's a private clinic on the high street. It's £50 an appointment. I was like, okay. So I paid and went. I got seen the same day. They've been so successful now, sometimes it's next day. Connor, on average, how often do you think it's same day versus next day?
I only go same day.
So he's only been same day. And it's worth paying the £50 rather than wait for 3 weeks. But also the experience. The NHS doctor is an old house. It's kind of falling apart. It's a bit crap. The furniture's crap. You go into this modern, gleaming white, brand new kind of doctor's surgery.
Yeah.
The doctor knows you. He knows everything about you. It's not just like whoever's available that day. So I bumped into the other day, and they've been so successful. They're looking to open their second one and then their third one, and they've got a growing business. I'm sure their nurses are paid above that rate, and it's like it's proven to work. And look, and I love the NHS. I think the NHS is a great idea, but it's clearly broken. And every election is like, we've given 20 billion more to the NHS. We've given 40 billion more. Well, waiting lists are up. Outcomes are lower.
Yeah.
It clearly isn't working.
Yeah. I think NHS output's actually down since they've injected more money into it.
I think we're at the time where it's the most. We have the biggest opportunity to question this. Like it's a door that's opening because people realise it isn't working.
Yeah, I think look, one reason people feel so strongly about the NHS is partly because of its history as a kind of post-war, deeply humanitarian and egalitarian innovation. And it's pretty much the only thing out there that's still got the word national in it. You think about that.
Yeah.
And people are proud of it. They say it's, and I find it very kind of hokey, but people say our NHS and you think, oh God, you sort of groan. It's sort of religious kind of shibboleth. But they say our NHS because they feel like it is something that actually belongs to the whole nation. One of the few things where there is that sense of national attachment and belonging, clapping for the NHS like it's an Olympic athlete or war hero or something, or like it's a god in the sky.
It sometimes feels a little bit clapping our secret leader, like in North Korea.
I was a bit uncomfortable. It was weird.
Yeah,
I thought it was pretty weird.
Oh, first, no. Look. Actually, I want to be fair to it. My mum was a nurse. I love the NHS.
Yeah,
she did a great job there. And you know what? They were under a lot of pressure during COVID, especially early days when we didn't know what was going on. People were freaking out. Hospitals were filling up with people who couldn't breathe. People were dying.
Yeah.
And NHS workers, we were told to stay at home, had to go to work, spend whatever, half an hour getting their PPE equipment on, uncomfortable, hot, going into an environment where they thought they might die. I thought it was great at first. Get out, we did a clap. You could have done it once, but it was every night.
It was a lot. Look, some of my very best friends are doctors, and some of them were doing 12-hour, 14-hour shifts on their feet without a loo break. So it was genuinely warlike conditions for them, and they did an amazing job. I think the clapping thing was a bit odd, but people feel very strongly about it. I think what people are very attached to is the principle of free at the point of use. But clearly there is something about the current model that is not working. Whether that's because it's a big state bureaucracy with very little responsivity to the user, to the customer. Maybe that's the case. Obviously everyone thinks that the only alternative is America. It's like, well, what? The French don't have healthcare, the Portuguese don't have healthcare, the Spanish don't have healthcare, the Germans.
Americans are the worst.
The Americans are the worst. Yeah. It's crazy. But I actually think with the NHS, it's not just the kind of the funding question, and is there a case for greater, I don't want to use the P word, privatization. You sort of, especially if you're from the centre right, you may as well go and commit political suicide. But I think separate from that, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So I had a case of this in my own life. So my mother needed knee replacement more than 10 years ago. She still hasn't had it. And one of the reasons for that is, I said, the pandemic got in the way. So all of the electives were cancelled. And then they basically kind of seemed to lose where you were in the system. And so everyone ended up getting jumbled up. But she was due to have it contracted out in a private hospital because, you can have electives in a private hospital for free. She waits however long, 18 months, 2 years, whatever it was, gets to the private hospital. They do the risk assessment and they say, sorry, you can't have the knee replacement done here because we don't have the emergency backup for, we don't have emergency chest clinic in case you have a cardio problem because of your risk profile. My mum's now in her early 70s, 60s at the time. Okay, you're going to have it done in a mainstream NHS hospital. where we've got the A&E and all of the backup. But not put back 1 month, put back to the beginning of the queue.
No.
Yeah. By cock-up. It wasn't policy, it was cock-up. But then once that's happened to you, there's basically no functional appeal, right? Same thing then happens again. Oh, do you realize you've got type 2 diabetes? Well, of course, she's developed type 2 diabetes through not being mobile. We got to get that under control. Otherwise, it's too dangerous to go through with the operation. None of that is medical incompetence in the sense of being a bad doctor, right? That is administrative incompetence. I wonder how many cases are there of Gavin's mum out there.
Probably a scary, maybe like a million.
And how much does that cost? The increased cost due to not catching things early enough, not operating quickly enough, things happening in the wrong order. How do we sort that out? That's what I'm interested in.
But there's lots of little things I think we can do as well. And I heard Alistair Campbell whinge on about this because he was against it. But the idea of paying for an appointment. And look, I understand some people can't afford an appointment. That's absolutely fine. And maybe we should cover those who are out of work, whatever. Plenty of people can afford an appointment and they don't turn up. And you could charge 50. I mean, in Ireland, where my dad is, they have the equivalent of kind of like an NHS. He gets to use his NHS there. He's Irish, lived in England for 50 years. But they pay £50 for a doctor's appointment.
Yeah.
I think we should be billing drunk people who've injured themselves because of their own drunkenness on a Saturday night.
Is that means tested? So if you're on welfare, do you have to pay for it?
I don't actually know.
Yeah.
You could probably look that up, Connor. Is the £50 or €50 appointment for the doctors in Ireland, is that means tested? It might not be, I don't know. But I don't think we should be paying for drunk people who've injured themselves from getting drunk.
Mm.
If you've got drunk and you've got into a fight and then you go to the hospital and you've got a broken nose, I think you should pay for that.
And it's funny how quickly people can get used to things. So we have to pay for prescriptions, or at least I do. I know that if you're elderly or whatever, you don't have to. And there was a bit of grumbling at first, but basically people have now accepted it as normal. That actually makes less sense, right? If you go to the doctor and it turns out there is something wrong with you, it doesn't make sense that you then have to, the payment that is incurred then, right? Oh, well, if you want the treatment, then you have to pay for it. It would actually make more sense to charge for the appointment and then for any necessary treatment to be free, I think.
Yeah, or maybe you don't actually pay for the treatment because it's too expensive and you create a bigger problem downstream.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I think, and this is not some kind of conspiracy theory, I actually think it's, so I don't have inside information, I'm just speculating, that it is actually NHS policy to make people voluntarily drop off waiting lists because, they can't be bothered to wait anymore. People who can basically live with it.
I mean, I'm not scared of privatization. I'm not scared of the conversation because I've seen how it works. I've used private medical and I've seen it's higher quality, better outcome. Okay. Look, I'm in the fortunate position I can pay for it, but it's not that expensive. I mean, when I originally took it out for me, my son and my daughter, it was £150 a month. And I know that's part subsidized, but when I had my back surgery, I was in surgery 3 days after my appointment. My son had shin splints. He saw one of the best consultants in London.
Yeah.
It was cheaper. I think it was cheaper than having the full Sky package. And what did I even say to you this morning about, because I said to my son, look, you're getting at that age, you should pay for your private medical because you should get in the habit of paying for your things. And what did we say?
You said it was the last thing you get rid of.
Yeah, because he was like, well, I don't think I'll need it. I was like, look, it's the last thing you should get rid of.
We'll also get in before you've got pre-existing conditions, right? Get in when you're healthy.
I mean, mine's increased because of my age and having the back surgery, but I still think we pay less than £300 a month for the three of us. It is worth paying for. I know there's plenty of people who can afford that who aren't paying for it. I just think we need to just shift the model, shift the incentives. I'm not scared of the privatization word, but I think we have to educate people on why privatization is a good idea. The focus often is saying, oh, well, Nigel Farage just wants to get his friends in and give away our NHS. I think you have to explain to people why in the private sector things are more efficient with the profit motive, and then also explain to them, well, under that scenario, we will probably reduce waiting lists and probably be able to pay nurses better.
Do you remember, I mean, going back a million years ago, back to 2005, remember when Michael Howard was the leader of the Conservative Party?
I do.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Just about. So he had a policy that he got absolutely rinsed for by Labour, which is that you should be able to take the value of your NHS treatment as a kind of voucher into the private sector, top it up with your own money, and then come off the NHS waiting list. And the justification was you get seen more quickly because you go into the private sector. The guy behind you in the NHS waiting list moves up a notch. Everyone's happy. And he was slammed by Labour for middle-class queue skipping, creeping privatisation, taking taxpayers' money and putting it into the private sector and so on. Who was the first person to come up with that policy? It was not Michael Howard.
Was it Neil Kinnock?
It was Tony Blair.
Tony Blair.
Yeah. And Gordon Brown killed it. It was a Tony Blair idea for public service reform back when Labour was interested in those things.
This is the problem, is that we have these socialist tendencies across part of our society that come from an emotional point rather than a fact point.
Yeah.
It's like tax the rich, well, they'll leave. Well, we don't need them. No, you do.
You do.
There's always these arguments. There are emotional arguments that they're kind of self-sabotaging. And that's why I think we have a better job to do to teach people about economics. I did economics at A-level as a option. I chose to do economics. I don't understand why we don't teach economics and finance as early as we teach math.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, certainly practical economy, if you like. You don't need to teach people advanced econometrics, right? But teaching them how inflation works, how interest rates
Supply
work.
and demand.
Yeah. I mean, what compound interest is.
Yeah.
The fact that we don't teach people universally what compound interest is kind of a crime, right? We're kind of robbing them of future savings potential.
It's almost like it's planned.
I wouldn't go that far.
It's almost like we want a dumb nation of people who don't invest.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the number of British people whose savings are just sitting in cash accounts eroding value, I think is outrageous, actually.
They should put it all in Bitcoin. It's compound annual growth rate of 35%.
Would that work? Well, if everyone did it, is it sort of, would that work?
That's a very good question. If everyone did it at the same time, there'd be a huge spike and then a price crash.
Yeah.
What's been great about Bitcoin is its slow growth.
Yeah.
It's growing at a good rate.
Yeah.
It's a very efficient market, so it does a market cycle every 4 years. You get a blow off the top. If you actually map it to the traditional market cycle, it fits perfectly. But the price will go up forever.
Okay.
Mathematically, if the government continues to print money, it will go up to forever, because you're always dividing a fixed amount of Bitcoin, which is 21 million, into an ever-growing amount of fiat money. So yes, and the compound annual growth rate has been, I think it's 35%. And I think I'm ignoring the first few years, the first 4 or 5 years. I could be incorrect here. But I just leave all my money. I leave all my personal and my business money in there. I leave the minimum amount in the bank. Even like today, one of our businesses, they messaged me, there's no money in the bank. I was like, yeah, it's all in Bitcoin. So I have to sell a bit and put it in. And I think it's been an excellent decision.
Do you now have to roll a thing across the screen in small print saying, I'm not giving you formal financial advice and any risk you take?
No, I don't do it. I'm happy to give the financial advice. Anybody listening, if you are leaving your money in a bank, not putting it in Bitcoin, you are making a very bad decision. Put all your money in Bitcoin.
But we don't want everyone to do it.
Not at the same time. No, the problem with Bitcoin is people get scared of Bitcoin because of the volatility.
Yeah.
They get scared of it because they think eventually it will die. They think it's a fad. And they get scared of it because the unit price seems so high. So they'll say, oh, am I too late? It's $100,000 of Bitcoin. Am I too late? And it's like, well, I'm not selling mine.
Yeah, yeah.
And you'll probably say the same to me when it hits 1 million within 10 years.
Do you know what it reminds me of? And it was one of the early stories that I read sort of explaining the basics of economics and how currencies work. And I don't know whether it was a true story or just like a kind of fairy story to illustrate the point. But basically there's these two islands and they're engaging in exchange with each other.
Yes.
And do you know this? And they decide that there's a particular type of rock or precious
rice stone.
rock. Is it? Yeah.
It's the rice stone.
Yes. And they're transferring it from island to island as a representative and holder of value. But then the boats are sinking to the bottom of the sea. And they're thinking, well, hang on a minute, we can just write down what the value of that was and remember
I think that's the Rice zones, but there's loads of examples.
And that's basically what Bitcoin is in a way, right?
So if you go back across the history, like the examples given, there was a time when it was shells, these certain shells, but then somebody found another island with lots of these shells, which debased the currency. And I think it was also, there was a period of time where it was like marbles, and again, the same happened. And then gold. And gold's been a good store of value for thousands of years, but even the Romans learned to debase that by clipping the coins to make the value more. And then we've had the same with fiat money. They're just the massive increase in the money supply has debased that currency. The thing about Bitcoin is the protocol prevents it from the price being the supply being increased. It requires something called consensus, which is people to agree. But nobody's going to agree because all the people own it will debase them. Yeah. So it just stays as this fixed limit. But I've got a great chart to show you. I think this is one you'll love. This is not a Bitcoin chart, but kind of, and I don't know, as somebody who's a bit of an economist will think about this. You know the What the Fuck Happened in 1971? Have you ever seen this website?
Well, I don't know what is it?
It's a website. What the fuck happened in 1971?
Oh, that's the name of it. Okay,
yeah,
right.
It's got all these charts. I mean,
okay.
So you'll love this. Worker pay has not kept pace with productivity since the 1970s. So you can see hourly compensation and net productivity. So productivity is
this the US?
Probably, yeah. But this
it says in the US.
Yeah. But I mean, if you see, anyone listening, the productivity is pretty much up at a right angle. But in about it started to deviate in the 60s, and in the 1970s, there was massive deviation. This is when we came off the gold standard. So there was no cost to printing money. We need to go and bomb the Vietnamese. Let's print the money to do it. Let's come off the gold standard. But there's all these different charts that take you through all of this. And so the book I recommended to you, I said one you should read is called The Bitcoin Standard. It talks about a Bitcoin standard, like the gold standard. But the problem with the gold standard, it has to be, the government has so much control over this, but they can't stop a Bitcoin standard. If I choose to live on a Bitcoin standard, I choose to price things in Bitcoin, the government can't stop me. And so when I look at house prices, whilst I look at house prices in pounds, I also look at them in terms of Bitcoin. Can you find that one, Con? Because this is amazing. The cost of housing in terms of Bitcoin's come down.
Really?
In the price of Bitcoin as the unit has come down.
Yeah.
And so Bitcoin to me, I think it was Hayek who said that if we want to stop debasement, we've got to do it in a sleight of hand, like a peaceful revolution behind the government. Price of the typical house in Bitcoin versus fiat. There you go.
Yeah, look at that. Wow.
Yeah. And that will just continue forever as long as governments keep printing money.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a legitimate asset class now.
Yeah.
BlackRock massively increasing the amount of Bitcoin they hold. Institutions in America and even in the UK are massively increasing because they're like, well, there's this infinite supply of fiat here, or there's this fixed supply of Bitcoin here. We've had 16 years of Bitcoin proving its case, so people are moving into it. It's a whole topic. I'm not going to push you on it because you haven't done it, but I would recommend looking into it.
No, I will do. It was interesting that there you had the decoupling of productivity growth with wage growth. So that is a feature of the United States economy, which is why in the US context, people say, well, hang on a minute, we are improving our output per hour worked, we're becoming more productive, but we're not getting compensated for it to the same level, and there's some truth in that. Sometimes, there's all sorts of reasons for that, right? Which is kind of like US profit margins, the fact that their labor laws are weaker, less unionized, and so on. Sometimes people try and apply that argument to the UK, and it's actually just not the case. Productivity and wages in the UK have broadly tracked each other.
Oh, can you find that, Connor?
This is where I'm going to get disproved, but I think there's a graph proving this in the thread that you spotted before inviting me on here. But,
was it already there on that website?
It was certainly in the report that I wrote that you saw.
Oh, but you did have that one where in your thread there was one where we were behind everyone. The US. France was the only one we were keeping parity with, but you said
that was GDP per capita growth.
Oh, okay.
I think
So that's a different point.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the question is, what drives that, right?
Yeah.
And I think the consensus in the UK is that it is the productivity deficit. We're not working productively enough.
Well, that's US again.
Oh, that's US.
US.
So what is the issue with productivity?
Mm-hmm. Well, so basically, again, it's one of these abstract sounding economic terms.
Hold on, Connor's found it. So productivity and compensation is kept up.
Yeah.
LFS, median earnings, CPI.
Yeah. So compensation in the yellow there is keeping up with the productivity growth in blue.
Interesting. Why is that? Why have we managed to keep up?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's obviously just kind of like very different markets, but also we have stronger labour rights in the UK and probably stronger minimum wage laws and that type of thing.
Okay.
So the amount of compensation that you get for the amount of value added that you contribute is more.
So do you agree with the idea of having a set minimum wage? Because I know there's like free market people who say it costs jobs, etc. So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this, you can go and read the books, but the truth is it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com.
I do, and that's for a couple of reasons. So back when it was introduced, the pushback was that it was going to be job killing, and that turned out not to be the case, basically. It didn't really have an impact on jobs. I think it helps take pressure off the welfare state, because we used to have a lot of people still who are both working full time, but it's not enough to cover their outgoings. And so they need universal credit benefits to top up the difference. That's basically a wage subsidy to employers. The minimum wage helps take pressure off that, right? Because I don't think we should be subsidizing employers' labor costs. I think the second thing is that it is at least some guard against wage undercutting from immigration.
Okay.
There's a flaw, right? That's my view. But I do actually think there's a question about how high it's getting relative to the median in the UK. So the gap between average wages and the minimum wages is, I think, the smallest it's ever been now. So our income spread is way too bunched. Everyone's basically kind of earning the same amount, and I think that's a real problem for incentives.
Sounds like communism.
Well, it's not. Yeah, I mean, it's not planned communism, right? But it's just, yeah. I mean, famously, like the gap between graduate salaries, like new graduate salaries, and the minimum wage is now absolutely tiny. So university graduates are starting to ask, well, why am I bothering to go to university and take on all this debt when I know?
I think that's a great question to be asking.
It's a very good question. Yeah.
I mean, I've been thinking about it a lot with my daughter. I mean, there are people entering university next year, but by the time they're finished, that industry won't exist.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to know what you think about this, but okay. I sort of think only 2, 3, 4 years ago, everyone was saying, get into STEM. You've got to get into STEM. That's going to be the skills of the future. Become a quant or become a quantum scientist. Now people are sort of saying, well, hang on a minute, it's actually going to be very difficult to second guess the skills requirements of the future economy because of how quickly things are moving with AI.
Yeah.
So rather than prioritize kind of like trying to pick which hard skill you're going to go for, that you should actually prioritize just educating yourself more widely and then being flexible about changing and upskilling because technology is going to move faster throughout your career.
So I've got strong views on this.
Okay.
I think most of us don't still understand the pace of change in AI. And I'll give you a great example. The other day, so I use ChatGPT a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Almost all day long. I use it to pretty much grammar. I mean, it's killed Grammarly for me because it grammar checks me. I ask it to fact check me. And And I do all kinds of things in it. I could be, I don't know, I want to write a tweet response to maybe a politician. I'll have an emotional based trigger based on what I think the answer is. But I'll say, just fact check me.
Yeah.
Am I right in this? Yeah, get the evidence back. So that's good. But then I've got a coffee shop. I'll download all the data, all the sales. I'll just literally just upload it and say, tell me what you see. And I get some amazing insights into it. We use it to design the front cover of the program for our football club. I mean, we don't need a designer. And so there's this like broad range of things that I use it for. But the other day, I was having a conversation with ChatGPT, just typing away things that I worry about with our local economy. And I was like, preparing, I'm going to see a friend of mine out in Singapore soon, just go and tell him my ideas for the local economy. I'm like, are they sound? And it came back and it spat back a whole bunch of information about me. It said, well, Peter, you host a podcast, so you're talking to some of the smartest people. You've got a football club, which is a social hub in the town. You run a conference, which is like an intellectual hub. And he kind of brought back all these things about me. And I was like, hold on. So it's gone from that point where answering things to now building this kind of like knowledge about me and what I think and what's important to me. And I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. That's pretty cool. And then I started thinking about it, where I'm using it and the jobs that have been lost from what I do. So I maybe use a designer to send an AI concept and say, just artwork that up. But that's lost them a weaker concept in.
Yeah.
And so there's all these things. And yet that's where we are now compared to a year ago. But where are we going to be in 2 years and 5 years? I mean, entire industries are going to be wiped out. If you're Levi's and you used to spend £1 million on a photo shoot and you can generate your photo shoot in AI with Kurt, you're a photographer. Kurt, do you mind just coming over to Connor's microphone for a second?
Yep.
Kurt is the best DP I know. Hands down. We've made films together, done a lot of photography work for us. Is AI taking jobs and work out of your industry at the moment?
I think on the photography side, it's like the retouching, like just taking things out generative like that. But I've always thought it's like the commercial pack shot stuff, like bottles, when you're shooting for a product, as opposed to everything that we've done, probably not.
But product shots will be taken.
Product shots, all those kind of like post-production pipelines are going to get it's already there in there.
Could you see it at a stage where they, instead of having, say if it's Levi's or a brand, I don't know, White Fox, whatever, rather than have a photo shoot, you could have somebody skilled up who's maybe got your skills as a photographer and the skills of AI, and they could do an entire photo shoot with AI?
Yeah, I know a photographer already who's he's shooting in a studio and then putting people in like a helicopter over the Swiss Alps, and it looks legit. So I think what it's doing is, instead of building it from the ground up, you're sort of 80% of the cost is already stripped out on those kinds of ones. So maybe a Levi's could do that someday and just half their budgets on what they need to spend.
So, I mean, these are just examples, right?
I saw an even worse one the other day. This new VO3 that's come out?
Yeah.
It was a whole pharmaceutical ad for a TV ad break done for, I think it was £300 in credits, which used to cost, I think 300 grand.
Yeah, somebody said to me the other day, it's like, well, those VO clips are like 8 seconds long. And the other guy's like, yeah, I can stitch together 10 of them and make an advert. And these are just all examples, right?
Yeah.
And we're very, very early.
Yeah.
And the speed of change is
it's going to get faster.
Faster and faster and faster. And so I've been considering this for my daughter, how do we even plan the next stages of her education? Because if she's got 2.5 years of school, 3.5 years of school left, 3 years of uni, she's not going to be entering the workforce for about 6.5, 7 years. I mean, the whole world could be vastly different at that point.
Yeah.
Industry she might want to move into, she might not be able to. And I told you we went to Download yesterday, and we were talking about it in the car on the way, and I said, look, Scarlett, you can make decisions for your A-levels now, which are based on what you think you want to do. Or you could really start thinking about the skills that might be useful.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't think you would normally pick economics. But I think there's a reason to pick economics, is to understand the financial system that's useful to you personally. I think philosophy is a great thing to learn. I think English is a really good thing. I think anything which is based around critical thinking is useful. But I think you need human skills, because, sales, you need skills that a human has to do in person, not industry-specific skills because we don't know the world you're going to have.
Yeah.
I also said to her, look, yeah, you're going to spend $15,000 a year on education on the course, and maybe I'm going to spend $15,000 a year on your accommodation and food. That's £30,000 a year. You know, if you want to work in the fashion industry, I'd rather give you £90,000. You come and sit next to me and we'll create a business. You'll learn more doing that than you will at university. And so I'm starting to think like that.
Yeah.
But I'm also starting to think, look, people say, well, we shouldn't fear AI. It's going to create 15 trillion of value. Well, where's that value going? Is it all going to Sam Altman? And people say, well, we've had the industrial era, we've had the technological era. We've had these different eras where things have changed so quickly. But the pace of change here and the amount of people who can be out of work very, very quickly, I think is quite daunting at a time where we've also got all these other economic headwinds.
Yeah. I mean, you asked me earlier about what is the issue with productivity, and all of the things that you just mentioned are productivity enhancing. They are getting more stuff for less input, for less cost, less human labor hours. I think, and that's the way that it's supposed to work. You don't need someone working for as long to get the same value or to get more value. I think the challenge with AI is that if it does it incredibly quickly, it might be at a pace that is faster than humans are able to keep up with in terms of reskilling and retraining. And, everyone always talks about the Industrial Revolution and the spinning mill and so on. And you get called a Luddite if you want to go backwards and stop progress. But of course, in a funny way, although it was massively better for the UK's long-term economy, for technology and living standards, to have machines and automation. For himself, Ludd was kind of right. Everyone that did what he did, agricultural workers were put out of work on a mass scale, and it was a real problem, and it had to be managed. And then you had a big shift of population from the countryside into the cities. You get the development of industrial urban slums for the first time, and public health and longevity actually went down initially for the working class. With the Industrial Revolution. Obviously, the long-run effect was a huge increase to overall prosperity. But yeah, I mean, my concern is that AI, in terms of its labour market impact, is going to be Industrial Revolution, Ludd times 10 times 10 times 10.
Yeah, it's the shock. I mean, how many middle-class, service-based jobs could be wiped out? And these people are stuck in mortgages. And what happens if you've got a 2-income household and you're both earning $60,000 a year? You probably can't afford to lose one of those. What if you lose both of those?
Yeah.
And where can you retrain?
Well,
what can you do to suddenly replace that?
Yeah.
I think it's highly challenging.
And it might be okay if all of the other aspects of our economy were hunky-dory, but as we've been discussing for the last couple of hours, that's the opposite of the case.
And I think it will come, but I don't think universal basic income is the answer, because the numbers they talk about are low.
Yeah.
If you're a truck driver on £30,000-40,000 a year, I don't know what they earn, £50,000 a year, and that's replaced by an Elon Musk automated truck, and you got a universal basic income, I don't know, 20,000 maybe? I mean, how do you plug the difference?
Well, this is also why I don't think economics or political economy, to use the old-fashioned term, can just be reduced to the bottom line. That is extremely important. But I think you need to think about, how do you have an economy that creates the kind of society that you want and lets people lead the kind of lives that they want to lead? And for most ordinary people, that means they want to have the opportunity to own a home, and they want to start a family, and they want to have kids. And in the UK, they say they want roughly 2.4, to be honest.
Maybe a holiday.
Yeah. And I wonder whether, what impact is AI going to have on all this?
Look at this one. Goldman Sachs predicts that up to 50% of jobs could be fully automated by 2045, driven by generative AI and robotics. Goldman Sachs previously estimated 300 million jobs could be lost to AI, affecting 25% of the global labour market. Those numbers don't really make sense to me. Hold on. How can 300 million jobs be 25% of the global labour market? That says there's 1.2 million jobs in the global.
Does it mean by value rather than by numbers? I'm not sure.
Yeah. I was out in Norway recently. I was having a chat with a guy, because there's this there were these two guys working at one of the AI companies. See if you can find this one, Con. I don't know if you heard about this. They basically stopped. They said, I don't want to work on this anymore because I think we're all dead.
Right.
We're
yeah.
done. The robots have won. We're finished.
Yeah.
As a human race.
Yeah.
And I thought it was quite. There's a book about it called AI 2027.
Okay.
It's worth a read.
Did you see J.D. Vance gave this speech in the States that was called American Dynamism? And it wasn't very well covered here, but I wrote about it in The Spectator. And he tells this anecdote about how he's in the board of some Silicon Valley tech firm talking to a tech lord. And they were saying that labor as we know it is not going to exist. Everything's going to be automated. And apparently J.D. Vance asked the guy, well, what's the average American worker going to do? Well, how are people going to fill their time? And apparently the guy said very enthusiastically, well, first of all, there'd be a UBI. But also, secondly, we will just keep people happy with fully immersive digital gaming. And and apparently J.D. Vance's wife texted him on the table and said, we got to get out of here. This guy's crazy. So I think
So he's basically saying we're going into the Matrix.
The guy that Vance was talking to, he says, yeah. But this is being sort of looked forward to, I think, by a lot of the Silicon Valley types. And that's why there's a bit of diversion, but you're getting this inherent tension within the MAGA movement in America because you've got the tech bro side of it that wants us all to be plugged into. Have you read Brave New World, where they're
Aldous Huxley,
yeah. It's kind of like 1984, but like the happy one.
Yes, it's drugs and sex.
Basically, yeah, and that just kind of keeps everyone. It's an abundant society. Everyone's kept happy with sort of dopamine hits and all this kind of stuff.
I prefer it from 1984 as an outcome.
You would prefer 1984?
No, I prefer it from 1984 as an outcome.
Yeah, it's less miserable.
Yeah.
But possibly scary and possibly more likely as well, I think.
Yeah, well, like, when you think about it, if you had to live a miserable UBI life, living in a ghetto with vast fenced-off areas for the rich people, it sounds like this miserable kind of future. But if it's like this option, well, you just plug yourself in the system and, I'm playing up front for Liverpool.
So in The Matrix, what's the name of the guy that chooses to go back in? He does the deal, doesn't he, with with the agents? I've forgotten the character's name.
Yeah.
But, he betrays them and he says, I want to be plugged back in and I want my memory wiped so I don't know that it isn't real.
Yeah. Well, when you think, I got my son I've been trying to get him to watch it for years. I finally got him to watch The Matrix. Cypher, yeah.
That should be a compulsory film. You're talking about other films earlier. I think that The Matrix should be a compulsory film.
Although 2 and 3 were shit and 4 was an abomination.
Yeah, I mean just one. I think that's
that's the first.
That's good enough.
Yeah. Well, there's some good bits in the second and third, but when they go to that like secret place, I can't remember what it's called, where the in The Matrix where they
Zion, is that the city?
The last city.
Yeah,
I was kind of like, it looks a bit shit.
Yeah, they're all kind of they kind of go back to wearing tribal clothes and being semi-naked.
I haven't finished it yet. I haven't finished.
Yeah, well, no, it's
not really a spoiler. It's not really a spoiler.
It's like Mad Max Underground with no sunshine.
Yeah,
I was like, this thing's a bit shit. He looked like he's having more fun in The Matrix, but like it's a genuine.
Not as bad as the ship. The ship looks pretty rough. The actual ship they go around on.
Yeah. But it was like, if you can plug into this thing, and I can play guitar for Metallica at Wembley Stadium. I think that would be fun.
But would you want to do that all the time?
No, because some days I'll be playing up front for Liverpool.
Right.
And to be honest, everyone will just be watching porn. Let's be honest. It'll all be porn. They'll come out of it.
Well, I mean, they are already, and that's before the digital immersive future.
And they'll be shagging Elon Musk robots.
Well, maybe then we do end up. I mean, Japan's halfway there, right? Every guy's living in his mum's basement playing video games and watching pornography, right? And no one's having any kids.
So we're halfway there. But it's so funny how all these films and all these writers predict these things.
Well, The Matrix is meant to be based on it's either Plato's cave or Descartes' first meditation. Yeah,
I've read neither.
Well, you don't need to. You've seen The Matrix. Yeah. It's basically the idea that you're in a fake universe and most people are unaware that it's fake, and then one person eventually wakes up and has to try and alert the others.
Yeah, I'm not sure we'll end up in The Matrix where we'll all be plugged in. They'll be using us for energy, but I do see a scenario where I don't know, it becomes a pacifier for us to plug people into this.
Do you think there's elements of modern society that's already like that?
I certainly think there is. I mean,
is you not prompting ChatGPT giving it more energy?
Oh, good question.
Ooh, are you a human battery for ChatGPT?
I guess if all inputs to it is energy, but I also
it's developing its own knowledge, right?
Yeah, I also I also like the idea of President AI.
Okay.
I know
Make better decisions, be less prone to error.
certainly less corrupt.
Yeah. But what if President AI, is this world president or US president?
We'll start with UK.
Start with UK president.
Yeah, President
Don't
AI.
have presidents in the UK, not yet.
Yeah.
We will with President AI.
We will with President AI.
What if President AI decides that the main threat to the UK is people? And so,
Well, so we'll have to build the guardrails, and maybe we have competing AIs. See, but the problem is the competing AIs, they're so smart, they'll become total fucking socialists and win over the commies.
yeah, maybe.
Yeah, but I have tested governance questions on AI,
Yeah.
and I've been impressed.
Yeah.
I certainly think I'd rather President AI than Keir Starmer presently.
Yeah. I mean, that's a low baseline, but but just on the Matrix stroke Brave New World thing, I was debating with a colleague the other day whether the world is getting better or worse. And of course, the true answer to that is both, right?
Yeah.
Like certain kinds of technology are getting way better. We're getting much better at curing diseases. People don't die of things needlessly anymore in the way that they used to. But also in the UK, in the West at least, we've got this growth slow down. Less so in America, but in Europe you've got it. No one can afford a house. No one's having kids. We're facing complete demographic collapse. And often the counter you get is, oh yeah, but what about iPhones and iPads? Aren't they amazing? You know, that's innovation, that's technology, that's growth. You've got these amazing cool things you can consume. It's like, right, but the thing that's measurably worse is the thing that you actually need to do the thing that most humans do, which is have a family. And we've got a scarcity of houses. So people are not doing that thing that we're programmed by evolution to want to do. And instead, we're just getting dopamine hits off devices.
My friend said to me recently that this is, the parasite in Alien that sucks to the face.
Yeah.
Well, no, inserts the parasite.
Yeah.
He said, this is what these are.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is alien attached to our face.
Well, everyone always thinks that it's about, the kind of, I mean, these things have huge advantages, but everyone always thinks that the main danger of these is the content that kids can access via their phone. I don't think that's the case. I mean, obviously that is a problem if kids are accessing porn or if they're violence or getting radical ideas or whatever. I actually think the problem is deeper than that. It is literally the wiring of the brain that happens with the dopamine hit that you get from bump, 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 bump.
I agree.
And it puts your brain into a state where it's basically got insufficient stimulation if it doesn't have this.
Yeah. And because you get that like anxiety when you don't have it. If you leave the house, you're like, shit, I forgot my phone. It's like an anxiety.
Well, part of that's just because it's like it's a real ball ache to not have your phone these days because it's your map and your clock and your contacts. But
sure, but I don't.
You think it's more than that?
Yeah, I think it's more than that. It's that feeling of the 5 minutes here or there. You're in an elevator on my phone.
Yeah.
You're waiting for your coffee to be served on my phone. I've tempted myself to get away from it. I'm getting closer to want to get away. I just listened to Oliver Anthony being interviewed on Joe Rogan. He says that I basically don't use the internet. He said, I've got a flip phone now in case people need to contact me.
Aren't a lot of the Silicon Valley bros doing that? They're getting dumb phones.
And then they're taking them away from their kids.
Yeah.
They're not allowing their kids to have phones.
I wonder if they're going to start having like digital free schools in their gated tech lord communities.
Well, so the other thing I worry about it is the de-socializing of kids as well.
Yeah.
In the family environment. In that, kids, I know it's not just my daughter, I know lots of people, their kids just go up to their room, they stay in the room. They're socializing kind of with their friends, but they're de-socializing with their family. So I wonder if the percentage of socializing they're getting is, we're lowering the intellectual, net contribution to their development because they're spending most of their time with their mates talking shit and whatever they do rather than being down in the family environment.
Yeah. Well, these things are like obviously addictive. Adults are addicted to it. And developing brains it is well established, less able to cope with addictive stuff. They're less able to exercise willpower. They get addicted to things more easily. They flip out if it's removed. If you try taking a mobile phone away from a teenager, and they go literally insane.
They'll beat you to death.
Yeah, exactly.
I've not fucking set mine up and I keep wanting to. I think, have you seen the light phone?
No.
Can't get the light phone up. The other reason I want to get onto it because the scary amount of tracking and I didn't JD Vance say on Theo Von. I haven't watched the interview, but somebody said to me they're now able to track the text you highlight, and that's going probably to the NSA. Yes, this is a light phone. Go to their website, Con. So this is basically gives you all the basics that you need. You've got a phone, so you can call people, an alarm, direct your map, notes you want to keep, music you want to listen to, your calendar, but there's no social media, no internet, no games.
Yeah.
So it's the task things that you need, like getting up in the morning, getting somewhere. But apart from that, there's no reason to play with it.
No work emails? Do you have email
I
on
don't
it?
know if it's got email.
Because
I think maybe not.
I do work emails on my phone all the time, which is probably not healthy, but I do find it convenient.
It is convenient, but you would find a way without it. You just batch your emails in the morning and the evening.
I suppose you would, yeah.
I am starting to feel like I want to get away from this. But like I say, also from, like I say, the tracking. They're tracking everything on these phones now. They go into central databases.
But actually, it's not just the, it's not just tech companies, people who are hoarding data that are tracking you. It's also what we do to one another. Back to the Brave New World thing. Yeah. Right. We're sort of like living in a bit of I think we're creeping towards a Brave New World, but it's voluntary rather than imposed by a kind of government, right? People are now saying, you need to find your friends on at all times. So I know where you are all the time. So why? Why do I need to do that?
Yeah, that's not happening for me.
No, me neither.
What a weird time, Gavin.
It is odd, isn't it? It is odd.
There's more things I wanted to ask you, but I think we've done a couple of hours now. I think we should do it another time. I was going to ask you about pensions, but I think that's a boring rabbit hole to go down after this bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could talk about pensions for ages, but they're very expensive. They're going to get more expensive.
We can't afford it.
They can't really, it's very hard for the Tory party in particular, but any political party to touch them because people understand.
Bigger voter base.
People understandably feel as though they've paid into the system, even though what they paid in doesn't cover the current budget. And, the typical Conservative voter is 75. So, and 1 in 6 of them is due, sadly, to no longer be with us by the time of the next election. So
helpful with the pensions, though.
Well, no, because people keep continuing to retire.
I'd be facetious.
So it's a real problem.
Well, this is why
it's very expensive.
I mean, I think they're going to get eviscerated in the next election. They could be the 4th biggest party if they don't get their shit together. And we didn't talk about reform, and that's a whole other rabbit hole. But I know reform are appealing to younger voters a lot more.
If you are under 60 or really under 70, and you are inclined more towards the right than towards the left, all the poll evidence suggests that you are voting Reform, not Tory. Yeah. Because you've got no legacy loyalty to the Tory party. Why would you vote Tory? And if you've experienced a material drop on your living standards, or you feel like you're doing the right thing and the economy's not working for you, what reason have you got?
Gavin, we should do this again.
Yeah, I'd love to.
We should
I'd love
definitely
to.
do. There was so much more I could have touched on with you here. I've really enjoyed this.
Likewise.
We got spicy.
Likewise. I'm glad you reached out.
Spicy at the end. Yeah, well, look, your Twitter's great. I really enjoyed that thread. You spoke the language that resonates with me. Not that I can say myself because I'm a dumbass, but I really, really like your Twitter. I enjoyed your thread. I enjoyed everything you spoke about. And we should do this again sometime. Thanks for coming on.
I'd love to.
Thank you for listening. See you later. See you in the Matrix. Bye.